Good evening, everyone. Dennis Mengan has returned tonight for a second show. So, Dennis, welcome back.
Thanks, Robert. It's good to be here again.
So, our topic for tonight, I'd like to sort of get in. We've been discussing these men's issues and issues relating to human sexuality and sociology.
Yes. Well, I think the place to start is that the social, sexual landscape has changed radically over the last, let's say, 40, 50 years, starting with the advent of effective birth control, which freed sexual intercourse from the consequences of having children, which I guess I should interject that most people are, pretty familiar with this turn of events, of what's happened, the sexual revolution, feminism, and so on. And so what has happened now is that women have come into the workforce in far greater numbers than they were 30, 40 years ago. It's generally considered, I would say that most women consider that they need a career. Birth rates have gone down so that it seems that most women only, they aspire to have maybe 2 children. There are obviously differences, individual differences. So what has happened there is that women, and all this is just very generally speaking, you have to speak in the broadest sort of terms when on this topic, but women are no longer dependent on men for an income. Women do have the power of sexuality, this is true, because the women are always the choosers, right? Generally speaking, men will have sex with any woman that comes along, and the opposite is not true with women. Women are very choosy, and this goes back to some very basic tenets of evolutionary psychology, in that women's eggs are expensive, men's sperm is cheap. So women have to be very choosy as to who is the potential father of their children. This also relates to the choice of women in that a pregnancy is a hugely expensive event for a woman. She spends 9 months pregnant and in a semi-helpless state, needing protection and sustenance. And after that, she's going to spend several years raising a baby. So she cannot afford to have an accident. It's very detrimental. This goes back to, again, in the old days, illegitimate children were very, very much looked askance on. And I would say that this is the underlying reason. This is very bad for society, very bad for the woman. It's bad for society to have women going around with illegitimate children, needing support from society, rather than being married to the father of the child or children. Now that monogamy is no longer quite so fashionable, with both the huge divorce rate and the delay of marriage, and also the taboo against extramarital or premarital sexual relations is pretty much gone. So the idea is that, yes, there's this notion of female hypergamy, which is that women want to marry or have sexual relations up the social scale. Women are attracted to status and power. Men are attracted to youth and beauty. And from an evolutionary psychology point of view, this makes perfect sense. The status and power of the man translate into sustenance and protection for the woman and her children, whereas youth and beauty in the woman translate into fertility and healthy children from the man's point of view. So now what has happened is that since women have moved into the workforce, they've basically moved up in status, no longer being dependent or as dependent on men for an income, but our brains haven't changed, and women are still looking up the social scale for their mates. So the consequence of this is that many men have been left behind, sexually speaking. Men who are in the workforce, who keep their noses clean, so to speak, study hard, get a decent job, and so on. In the past, that would have guaranteed them a mate.
That's kind of what we wrote. I had this great article up at Ferdinand Bartemuth's site called George Sodini and the Contract Between the Sexes. And if you don't know who George Sodini is, he was this guy who, I think he went like 20-something years without having any kind of relationship, and he just went postal and he shot up a bunch of women in a gym. But what it said, like there used to be this contract between the sexes where if a man behaved decently and worked hard, that automatically entitled him to a wife, and that's not really the case anymore.
Yes. To start with, your remarks in connection with George Sodini are on target. In the past, a man like him, he was seemingly decent looking. You know, he worked out in the gym. He had a good job. Owned a house, and so on. I will interject here that we can't make too much of this because the man did murder people. He's one case, but yes, a generation ago, a man like him would have had a wife or at least girlfriends and so on. But he turned out to be in the sexual department a complete loser and acted out on that, murdering, I think, 3 women. And I would add what you said about men are still being fed this, that if they work hard, get a decent job, and act properly within the bounds of society, then they can get a wife, they can have a mate. And I would say that increasingly many men are finding out that this is not true. I think it would help that if more men were cognizant of these changes. In my personal conversations with people, I bring this kind of thing up, and most people seem totally oblivious to it. Around that figure, 3/4 of all divorces are initiated by women. And so you have to ask yourself, why is that? There are legal reasons for that, but there are also social, sexual reasons for that. And women initiate divorce, and because they have every incentive to do so, and they end up getting supported by the man, on pain of legal penalties for the man. Divorce courts are just notoriously anti-male, with custody of children almost always being awarded to the woman, getting child support and alimony and so on. And so, as you mentioned on Royce's site, that the higher number of sexual partners a woman has had translates into a greater likelihood of divorce. So therefore you have these what is known in the lingo as AFCs, average frustrated chumps, in their 30s, finding these women who have had all these sexual partners and then want to settle down. They get married, and then pretty soon they're ripe for a divorce, and in which they get pretty much financially raped legally. So the whole thing is pretty much a mess for men, and this just has so many larger implications for society. When you have so many men alienated from the system, well, then they no longer give support to society. They feel alienated. They have figuratively dropped out. Many men have become under or unemployed deliberately, and they think, why bother?